The new National Planning Policy Framework came into force in England on the 27th of March 2012. It had been subject to bitter criticism by environmental campaigners, with Simon Jenkins of the National Trust saying that the first draft had effectively biased the system in favour of anyone who wanted to build something. He's reputedly happier with the final draft. The National Planning Policy Framework has allegedly simplified 1,500 pages of scattered planning policy statements down to just 50 pages. And we're going to try and simplify it even further today. And we're very grateful to have Nigel Howarth from Clifford Chance, specialising in planning, environment and public law. He's the head of Clifford Chance's Global Environment Group and also a member of the UK Environmental Law Association. So thank you very much indeed, Nigel, for coming in. Let's start with the basics if we could. Just the intention, the basic intention behind the policy framework.
Well, the policy framework is really the government's setting out what their planning policies for England are going to be, and it's at a strategic level. And we have, for a long time in England, had this sort of governmental position of setting out what their policies are, which are then taken up to a more local level in what are known as development plans. They take that policy, put it into more local detail, and so the government gives the strategic direction. So the government has brought out this framework to give a new strategic direction to planning. They require that to be put into planning permissions. Any decision taken by local authorities must take it into consideration. And the key theme that the government were trying to get across really is sustainable development, and in particular positive growth is one of their key aspects of it. It's not for everything. There are large national infrastructure projects are covered elsewhere. It is for more general planning.
Okay, and when it says it's come into force in England, what about Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland?
Well, planning is a devolved matter, so that's up for the national assemblies to make their own decision as to what framework and policies they would bring in.
Anything in the pipeline?
No, I mean, the minister says, look, it's nothing to do with him, it's all devolved, although interestingly, his boss, Eric Pickles, has, in response to a question in Parliament, stated that they were in conversations with the assemblies to try and see if they would bring something forward.
Okay, and it's in force, but what about transitional arrangements?
Yes, it came into force as soon as it was published, which meant that all local planning authorities had to take it into account in their decision making. They're under a duty to get on and update their development plans, but there is this 1 year transitional period where any policies that are in a development plan, they can make a decision, a planning decision in accordance with them, providing there is no more than a little conflict with the policy. So if there was a significant conflict, then the guidance is, no, you can't just carry on with your existing development plan. But if there is limited conflict, and that's not defined as to what limited conflict would be, they can, for 1 year, just carry on as normal.
So assuming that people are watching this programme within the transitional period of that 1 year, what should developers be following? Should they be working to the existing or the proposed?
Well, unfortunately, probably both. So the development plan is still very important. It'd be very unlikely it will be updated within that time frame. So they must try and comply with what the development plan says, but also be very aware of what the framework says, because if there is a significant conflict, then they're going to have to see if they can comply with the framework more than the development plan.
Okay. So the uproar that we heard about before this thing was finally resolved was arguing for a much more focus on brownfield development, which is now included within the document. So how has this actually evolved? What's actually changed since you?
Well, there was, you quite rightly say, there was a huge uproar by many organisations, because it was seen as this licence to sort of concrete over the countryside. And an initial draft had a focus on brownfield, and that was taken out, and so the uproar was huge about that. It is now a core planning principle that the local authorities should seek to have an efficient use of land, and that is including the reuse of land, i.e. brownfield land. And there used to be a national target. That's gone, but the framework says that local authorities can bring in local targets. So there is an emphasis back on using brownfield land.
So the headline issue, which you've already mentioned, of sustainability, it's kind of runs through the whole document. They say it's like a golden thread throughout the document, don't they? This framework, they say, not only defines sustainability beyond the Brundtland classical definition, but they almost saying this document is the definition of sustainability as far as the government is concerned. So can you just tell us whether that clarifies or confuses issues as a person of the law?
Yes, I wouldn't say it clarifies it too well. I mean, you quite rightly say is that the Brundtland definition of meeting the current needs but without harming the needs of future generations has long been the recognised definition of sustainable development. But when you bring it down to the level of, let's say, a planning policy, what does that really mean? And so the government have said, look, we're all about positive growth, about making economic, environment and social progress, and that's what we mean about sustainable development. However, they're very conscious of the problems in New Zealand that they ran into when decisions had to be for sustainable management of natural resources. And there was a lot of litigation about that. And so they're very, very conscious that there could be a lot of litigation if they just have a general definition of sustainable development. So fairly cleverly, what they've said is, look, all of these policies put together, taken as a whole, is what we mean by sustainable development for planning. That doesn't mean to say that people won't still seek to say, well, that's still not clear enough. But I think in the circumstances, that's probably not a bad job by them to have done it that way.
So you still have plenty of work?
I would hope so, yes.
So the Minister of Planning, seen on the screen at the moment, has confirmed that development that is sustainable should go ahead without delay. A presumption in favour of sustainable development is the basis for every plan and every decision. Can you just unpick that a little bit, explain what that means?
Yes, I mean, this is one of the key aspects of the framework, and the government have set out all of their policies saying this is what we mean by sustainable development. And so if somebody brings forward an application for a development and it meets those policies, it is presumed that it would be granted planning permission. And with our plan-led system, where all the local authorities have to put in place a development plan for their area, saying what development is allowed and the characteristics of it, that should be in compliance with the framework, so that if somebody brings forward an application, it should be decided in accordance with that development plan. And where they haven't updated the development plan, the presumption works that it should be granted planning permission unless there are adverse impacts, significant impacts, which outweigh the benefits.
Okay, that's clear. You're clear. I'm just saying the document maybe is a little bit more complicated. Let me read out clause 199. Local planning authorities should consider using local development orders to relax planning controls for particular areas or categories of development where the impacts would be acceptable, and in particular where this would promote economic, social or environmental gains for the area, such as boosting enterprise. Now I read that as relaxing planning controls is okay, almost obligatory, if development helps the local economy. Is that a good reading?
Well, local development orders aren't new. They've been around since 2006. And what they do is, effectively, they deem planning permission for certain types of development. And they have been brought in, as I say, a number of years ago, and their use encouraged for things like to reinvigorate the high street. For example, change of use to temporary uses. So rather than have lots of empty shops, you can have temporary shops, even if it's a slightly different change of use, which would normally have required a planning permission. So it's a tool that's been used before by government and local authorities. And I think in this case, given the framework is all about promoting growth and the economic role in planning, is they're encouraging its use. So I don't think it's obligatory, but they are certainly encouraging it.
Yeah, so economic growth is a priority. That's what I was trying to get at.
Yes.
So where did that kind of come from? What's the origins of that strategy? 'Cause
Well,
it's normally been the classical environmental sustainability, whereas this seems to be going for the more economic, is what I'm saying.
Yes, and I think that this is probably what is the key difference about the framework from what we had before. And I think it all goes back, in my mind, to about 2006 and a report done by Kate Barker for the last government looking at land use. And that was very much driven by what could planning do to help the economy. And so if you fast forward to today, what you now have is government policy, which if you read the document throughout there, in all aspects is all about promotion, positive growth, promotion of the economy. Yes, there's a balance with environmental and social, but I'm sure some word count would see that the economic growth is probably their key theme. And I think that is a difference in to the existing planning system we had.
So is it a possibility that, I mean, partly what Simon Jenkins was complaining about, any old commercial architecture may get permission, provided, it gives jobs?
Well, no, I don't think it's quite as clear cut as that. I understand the concern that suddenly development, at any cost is the fear of everyone. But if a careful read of the document, there are still many of the policies that used to be there. Some emphasise more than before on things like good design, and there is promotion and enhancement of the environment and protection of certain areas like the Greenbelt. I mean, there's a lot of policy about that. So this is not a blank cheque for development anywhere.
Okay, so local development plans. I know they're not new, but how do the local development plans fit into this kind of national framework?
Very much, as I've mentioned, we have this plan-led development system. And what this framework says is you need to update all of your plans in accordance with this framework. So in a certain amount of time, probably years, if past records are anything to go by, all of those local plans should conform to this framework and the policies in it.
So does one have primacy over the other at the moment?
Well, we're down to, the law is an application must be determined in accordance with the plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. The framework is a material consideration. The courts have demonstrated over the years that when you have a brand new policy by the government, that really has a very strong influence and it is a very significant consideration. So the development plan is out of date or is silent, then the framework will have primacy.
Okay. Well, another type of plan affected is the Neighbourhood Development Plan, and this plan arises out of the Localism Act, details of which you can see in an earlier programme. And this is where community groups get permission to build a relatively modest development reflecting the support of at least 50% of the local electorate. Now, there's lots of discussions we could have about that, but I just wondered if you could tell me the difference between these kind of concepts which kind of come up a lot in the documents of neighbourhood development plans and neighbourhood development orders and community rights to build orders.
Yes, as you rightly mentioned, this is very much in the Localism Act, which, as its name suggests, it's the government's drive to give power back to the people. So a neighbourhood development plan is something that a parish council or a neighbourhood forum, which is a body set up, it has to have 21 members from people, the majority of which people in the locality, and they can put forward their own plan to the local authority who have a look at it. It goes to an independent examiner, he checks it complies with national policy, and if so, it then goes to a referendum. And if it comes in, then that is a plan that if people make an application in accordance with, then that should be granted planning permission. Similar to that is actually the order, the neighbourhood development order, where instead of an overall plan, they say for a certain type of development or a class of development that has deemed planning permission. And that goes through a similar process because both of them must comply with the national framework. That the framework makes that clear, but it must also apply with the local development plan, the council's development plan. The community right to build order is a type of neighbourhood development order. It's more a community body can be set up and promote that order for more community facilities, such as affordable housing or a new community centre. And if that order is passed by the referendum, then a development bringing one of those forward would be deemed to be granted planning permission for it.
Okay, good. Front loading, again, a phrase which kind of comes up a lot in the documents. Can you just explain what that means in terms of a developer's relationship with the local authority?
Yes, I mean, this is a change in planning that's been coming and developing over the years, and we've seen it at the large infrastructure projects level, and now it's coming in at the more local level. This is all about pre-application engagement and consultation. It's about resolving the issues before you make your application. So you're encouraged to engage not only with the council and discuss your proposals, but also the local authorities and other the local people and other statutory bodies to really have an acceptable development, so that when you've made your application, it should go very smoothly through the process and you won't need public inquiries or public hearings.
So the framework actually says, two quotes which struck me: local planning authorities should approach decision taking in a positive way, and local planning authorities should look for solutions rather than problems. I kind of thought that's what they did anyway. So I mean, apart from a faintly patronising view of what planning officers do, is there some more substance behind those comments?
Well, I think you have a very optimistic view of certain councils. Some are excellent at contributing and being positive already, but others still, I think, very much sit in their role as we are development control, not development promotion. And the government, through this framework, are very much looking for the local authorities to help the promotion of development in their areas. And I think it's that ethos that they're seeking to implement across all the local authorities, rather than it's something in fine detail, with behind those general statements. So at the moment, they are just general statements, but it's a change of emphasis.
Okay, well, speaking of general statements, I've been asking some specific things arising out of my reading of the document, but is there any general points that architects or the construction industry should be aware of at this stage?
Yes, I mean, I think this is a very important document. This presumption is a change, but it's not just going to be a tick box every time you put in an application because you've got a presumption in favour of development. This is the government policy. The local authorities have yet to take it on board and put it into their plans. So I would advise that anybody bringing forward an application for a development still has to do a very full and thorough job. It's got to be very well designed. That's clear from the framework. It has to be supported by a very good evidence base and of assessment of potential impacts to demonstrate that it is sustainable development. And if you can demonstrate that, then yes, there's now a very good chance that it will be granted permission.
All right, the final thing, I suppose, is that all the hype was about, as I said at the beginning of the programme, taking 1,500 words of existing documentation and making them into 50. But then you find that there's actually existing PPSs, like the PPS 25 on flood risk, which still sit in the background that have to be referenced. So this idea about it clearing out red tape and simplifying things, actually that's not really borne out, is it?
Well, it was quite ironic that they brought out some technical guidance as to what was meant by the framework, almost immediately. So we had some guidance on the guidance, which wasn't meant to exist. But that aside, look, what they have done is taken a huge amount of guidance and condense it down. In doing so, they have probably lost some valuable guidance. They have got rid of a lot of, some of these documents were 50, 70 pages long and didn't need to be. They could have been 10. So they have got rid of a lot of irrelevant guidance. In the process, yes, they probably have lost a few bits that would have been very useful, and I think we will see them come back. But I think the lesson is learned that they should be short and they should be very clear. Otherwise, we just get lost in this mass of paper, and that slows the whole process down.
Well, speaking of very clear, thank you very much indeed, Nigel. That was a very useful clarification of quite a complicated document of just 50 pages long, but very well worth reading yourselves. So again, thank you very much, Nigel, for explaining it to us. Nigel Howarth, partner at Clifford Chance. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you again next time.